We're here with Maha, who is the Associate Professor of Practice at the Center for Learning and Teaching at American University in Cairo. And um, we want to talk about a lot of things, but I originally became aware of you through my personal learning network on Twitter and also through many kinds of open courses. So you participate, you're a very active participant in the places where educators around the world participate online. And so a lot of what we're doing together are online courses in which we are asking educators to ask their students to blog and to tweet openly. What do you think of that? Should students blog and tweet openly as part of their learning, and what are the
Right,
trade-offs that you see?
right. So hi Howard, and thanks for having me. This question has been on my mind for a really long time. Um, as for me personally, this has helped me immensely. I mean, Twitter and getting to meet people through Twitter has helped me a lot through my PhD. And then after I finished my PhD and taking open online courses and using Twitter and blogging openly has helped me connect with people and has enhanced my learning potential so much that I wanted to share it with my students. And so last year when I was teaching, I had my students blog openly. And for them, one of the major benefits they got out of that was to think before they write something. So they're not just writing it for me, they're writing it for the world. And one of the biggest benefits they got from that was that they got to get responses from people all over the world as well. So I had people in my own PLN respond to them, and they were amazed that people from Brazil and Scotland were responding to them and starting to feel like what they were writing was useful to other educators. Um, and then some of them started to think differently about some of the initiatives they wanted to do. So instead of thinking of doing things just for their own school, they decided, well, why don't I just create a website for people from anywhere to use it? So they're starting to think of their own circle of influence differently. And so that's definitely one of the things that I want students to get out of it. And then there's of course the riskiness of that in the sense that there are certain things that they would be able to tell me in a closed classroom about what's happening in their schools, and there are political issues of writing that online. And there's, whether they have the judgment. My students are teachers usually, and they're, whether they have the judgment to know when to stop saying something online and what that means. And then there's also the issues of whether they use their real names or not, whether women could face harassment or things like that. And these are things that we need to discuss. So you'd have to spend a lot of time, I think, in a class discussing things like that. And then there's the other issue of how some people feel about being made vulnerable online, because it's blogging is it has an arrogant side that, oh, I'm saying something that I think people might want to know, and it also has a very humble side where you're making yourself vulnerable. You're putting your not peer-reviewed ideas out there, especially for academics who are used to that. And so, some people write very thoughtfully. I'm not one of them. I write very spontaneously. And I ask my students not to overdo the blogging because it's a blog, it's not an academic paper. And so, making themselves vulnerable like that, some people are not ready to do that. I have a colleague at work who says that she feels very exposed when she tweets, and writing something publicly like that, she needs to think about it a lot. So I can't imagine how she'd feel in something like a Twitter chat, for example. And so I'm always conflicted about, should I, require students to blog openly and take advantage of all this openness and this connection, the potential of that connection that they can't know until they've tried? Or do I respect some people's needs to not do that? And how do you encourage people who have potential to learn from it but are scared of it right now and scared of that risk? So, what do you do?
Well, I try to model um, what I'm asking people for, and I start out by trying to demonstrate what the advantages are. So, when Twitter first started and I was teaching digital journalism students, there was a lot of skepticism about why should a serious journalist use Twitter at all. So at the beginning of class, I got onto Twitter and I posed the question to anyone who was paying attention on Twitter. I'm in a class full of journalism students, and they would like to know why should they use Twitter at all? And then I checked back 20 minutes later to see who had replied, and there were a lot of replies. And I
Right.
remember one of them was from a fellow in the White House press corps who said he was about to get onto Air Force One, and that a lot of the journalists he communicated with sort of had the first word with each other, not on breaking news, but on general things like I'm about to get on the president's airplane and he's going to so and so.
Hmm.
Happened through these informal conversations on
Right.
Twitter. So
Right.
that was a particular question, but you can come up with any kind of question, and I
Right.
think that if your network is responsive to you, and that's sort of another issue, I don't think that you can expect your network to be responsive to you if they don't feel like reciprocating for what
Right.
you have given them.
Yes.
So, I try to model that. Look, here are things that I find out, and I know that people who are following me are interested in some of the things that I'm interested in teaching and learning online. At that time, digital journalism. I find out something that would be useful to them. I let them know. This is an
Right.
old habit of mine. It
Yes.
doesn't cost me anything extra to let the world know what
Yes.
I've discovered. And
Right.
then when I'm
Right.
in a classroom and I ask a question and I check back in 20 minutes and I've got 50 answers, there's the payoff. So
Right.
I try to model it, but I think I do want to circle back to a point that you made. Particularly females do
Yes.
have a
Yes.
vulnerability on Twitter, and
Yes. That's
and and
true.
there have been some attacks as well. So I think it
Right.
is important, and for young people as well,
Hmm.
to, if not be careful, at least be
Right.
aware of
Yeah.
the consequences of putting your name
Right.
out there.
Right, right. And I mean, someone just made me realize, I think it was Alan Levine, and he was talking about what you put up on Facebook because a lot of people's moms are on Facebook, so they're a bit more careful about what they put on Facebook. But our moms usually aren't on Twitter, so we're usually not as careful about what we put there. But see, the thing about females, they're more vulnerable online, but they also have more to gain online if they're, for example, in the kind of situation I was in, and I know a couple of others who were mothers who were on maternity leave, but their intellect was still up there. So I'm not going to work and I can't work full time because I have a young baby and I want to concentrate on her. But I need to connect with people and have an intellectual conversation. And that Twitter was how I survived that maternity leave. I got to meet so many people online. And like you say, it's I take a lot, but then I also give a lot. Because it's so simple to give in that way. I'm not I've got something useful and I'll just share it with the people with the right hashtag or actually contact them directly. And I think like if we get our students to check their Twitter regularly enough and start to see that, I think they'll start to see the benefit of it. But there's an initial, I think, no matter how much you talk to people about it, there's an initial time where they need to actually just be using it. And that's why I think if they're in my class, I want to use that time to give them that. So this semester I'm teaching undergrads and I want to play a Twitter literacy game with them. I don't know if you know T versus Zombies.
No, how does
Apparently
that
you can't
work?
say it. So it was a game that Jesse Stommel and Peter Orabo started, and we're planning to play it internationally this semester with a larger group of people. And I had to explain in my syllabus to my students why I'm forcing them to play a Twitter game. Because it would seem like I don't usually force my students to do anything, but that's something that I think if they learn the Twitter literacy by playing that game and I'm trying to make it fun, then maybe they'll take something from that for the rest of their lives if Twitter exists for the rest of our lives. But the general concept of social media and sharing and openness, I think.
How does that game work?
It's very difficult to explain.
Uh, uh,
It really is difficult to explain. But that particular one, you have humans and zombies on the game, and there are ways to convert someone to a human or a zombie, and then there are ways to for humans to gather together. And the rules of the game change every few hours, and sometimes you need to do all sorts of things that help improve your social media literacy. So you learn a lot about collaborating online, and you learn a lot about using Twitter cleverly. So those are some of the things that it does for you.
I know that you're involved with faculty development, and
Yes.
I also know that you're involved in a lot of these open connectivist learning experiences, CMOOCs, and and other experiments. How do you explain that to them, and how do you kind of bridge that gulf between their traditional ideas of pedagogy and the kinds of experiments you're participating in?
Right. So I mean, again, definitely the being a faculty developer, meaning I work with all kinds of faculty. It's difficult for them to explain at all what I'm talking about. And what's more is I wouldn't want to force anybody to try what I'm doing, but I sort of feel like there's this potential learning way of learning that you guys aren't experimenting with at all. And I know it doesn't work for everybody, but you want to sort of, I mean, they can tell I'm enthusiastic, but they really have almost no idea what I'm talking about. On the other hand, I mean, there are some people who just this would not work with. It wouldn't work. It wouldn't work for them. They wouldn't feel comfortable trying it. Um, I mean, really, I really don't know how to bridge that gap until now, because I really don't think it's. I think it's something you need to learn experientially. I don't think there's any way you can talk to somebody about something like this kind connected learning, and I don't think they'll understand it until they've experienced it and experienced that responsiveness in that. But some of the things that my colleagues at work see is, for example, the kinds of collaborations that I have and what comes out of them. So, for example, there was Ed Context that I was telling you about earlier. So that's a network that we created. It was the idea originally of Sam Sharma, who I was co-authoring an article with him. I met him online. He saw me. He saw something that I'd written. Then I saw something he'd written, and we were talking on Twitter, and we wrote an article together. And then we decided to form a group that has a blog of educators from all over the world to share their experiences. And we had people joining us from online. Like, none of us has ever met each other. And there are people from RISO 14 that I met through that MOOC, and through all sorts of different places. And so getting all these people together, and then with our personal contacts, getting them to publish stuff. So people are seeing the fruits of that connection, making that connection, then what can come out of it. I'm hoping that the playing that game online and the kind of connections that comes out of that might convince some people about it. Yeah, I mean, I still haven't figured out how to get any of that across if people don't actually come in and try it, I think.
To you, what are the advantages of participating in the way that you do versus your traditional pedagogical path?
Right. So, I mean, the connecting advantage in itself, which is if you don't connect with people online, you're restricting yourself with the people who are around you, and that's limiting. That's kind of like growing up in a small town and never traveling outside of it, and so you never get exposed to different ideas. And so the internet gives you that opportunity to travel outside without leaving home, right? So that's immense potential. You're never going to be able to travel to all these places in 1 minute, but you can in a Twitter chat, for example, listen to all these different views. And this could be an illusion because connection across cultures and across countries isn't really a simple thing. But when you're talking about a common interest like education, and all of us come from different educational contexts, but we still find ways to talk about it, all of us. And so that is immense in itself. It's that if you're thinking out loud, like I use my blog to think out loud, I'm no longer thinking with myself. I have other people giving me feedback on my own thinking, and that develops my thinking to much higher levels than I would have thought on my own. And from that, I've started collaborating and writing things with people and doing research with other people from all over the world, and that diversity of people coming together to do that is potential. And through those people that I'm learning about new things that I wouldn't have been exposed to, and then bringing that back to my own context. So even though I can't necessarily take them all the way to do a connectivist MOOC or to watch a connectivist MOOC or to be part of one, there are also things that I learned from that I can take back to my own context. So, for example, in the Connected Learning MOOC, we did all sorts of makes. So we'd make very interesting things, and I'd blog about some of these, and then I'd show them to some of my colleagues that work with them. Oh, we'll use that in our teaching. So maybe they won't use the whole thing, but they'll use parts of it. And I, for example, was thinking about how to introduce Twitter to my students. I'll blog about a Twitter scavenger hunt idea, and then people people in my local and international network will benefit from that. And all these ideas are not coming from my own head alone. They're coming from that connection with different people all the time. It definitely keeps my brain occupied 24 hours almost a day, whereas otherwise it might not have been. And it's a very stimulating experience.
Well, I think others will find this useful to understand your experience. And thank you for your time, Dr. Bali.
Thank you, Howard. And I've asked Dr. Bali.